Estee Felton, and welcome to the Ingles table. We're making something really tasty today. This is my Matcha Swirl bread. I went to Ingles to get everything I need to show you this recipe, so let's get started. I love this bread because it's light and fluffy, and the way that we're gonna make it, you'll have this beautiful little swirl when you cut into the bread. This bread is Japanese inspired, so it's gonna start with what we call a hot water roux. It consists of 3 tablespoons of flour and a half cup of water. You're going to microwave this until you get a pudding-like consistency, so about 20 seconds at a time until it looks like this. Once you have that, you can put it into your mixer bowl. Into the hot water roux, we're going to add some milk and an egg. You can put the mixer bowl into the mixer, and we're going to use the whisking attachment, and we're going to mix it on low until it's nice and smooth. Once it's nice and smooth, we're going to take the next step, and that's going to be adding our flour and our yeast. Once you have that on the mixer, you can go ahead and turn it back on low. And using your spatula, you can help get the flour into our egg and flour mixture. Once that is mixed, we're going to let it sit for 15 minutes. And while it sits, I'm going to get the dough out of the mixer and let it sit. I'm going to switch out my hook from a mixing hook to a dough hook. Now that that's set for 15 minutes, we're going to add our salt and our sugar to the dough. Once you add the salt and sugar to the dough, you're going to turn it on low-medium speed again. And we're going to let that mix at this low level for another 5 minutes. So now that we've let that run for 5 minutes, the next step is to add butter. So we're going to add butter a little bit at a time. You can kind of slowly add them in chunks to allow the butter to get into the dough slowly. Once the butter is incorporated, we're going to let that run on low speed for another 5 minutes. After we've let that mix for 5 minutes, we can now take the dough out of the mixer to knead. This is the exciting part about making bread. You finally get to see your dough come together. It should be soft and fluffy, sticky, but easy for you to mold and maneuver. If your dough is extra sticky, just put a little bit more flour on your mat to help, with the stickiness. I'm going to take my spatula and I'm going to move all the dough to the middle of the bowl. This will help me get the dough into a circle onto the mat. Requires a little bit of elbow grease. There it is. So now you have the dough on the mat, and we're going to knead it for just about 30 seconds. What I'm going to do is take that dough, and you can see just how fluffy and light it is. If your dough is in the right place, it's going to feel like a cloud, and that's exactly what you want, and that's what we have here today. So I'm going to take the dough now, and in order to make the swirls in our matcha bread, we need to cut the dough in half. And you want to cut it in half as close as possible so that your layers are even. I just like to use a pizza cutter, and I cut right down the middle. I would say they weigh about the same. So the first one I'm going to gently roll into a ball like this and set it to the side. We'll come back to that one. I'm going to take the second ball, I'm going to return it to the mixer, and I'm going to mix in our matcha powder. That's going to give the matcha swirl. So we'll have a white dough, but we'll also have a green dough. So you put your dough back in the mixer, you get your matcha in there, and you can mix that for about 2 minutes until you see the green consistent in the dough. Slow at first, so all the matcha doesn't come out. Once your matcha is mixed into your dough, you can take the bowl off the mixer, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to knead our dough into a round circle. And you can already see just how much greener this dough is compared to the regular dough. So we're just going to knead a little bit. You can add a little bit of flour if it's a little sticky. We're also going to knead this for a few seconds. I love that beautiful color in the dough. Once you're happy with how the dough looks, again, you're going to turn it into a tiny little ball. And what we're going to do is we're going to put each dough into its own buttered bowl and let it rise for an hour and a half. An hour and a half to 2 hours. You want it to double in size. So we'll be back after the dough has risen. So we're back and our dough has risen to double in size. Now is when all the magic happens and we begin to put the doughs together to create the loaf of bread. So I'm going to start with the white dough. I'm going to put it on a floured surface. And what you want to do is you want to kind of, take out all the air that had gotten into the dough to begin with. We're going to press it down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make it as square as possible. This is important to allow you to roll it out to the proper size for a loaf. I'm actually going to move this over just a little bit. So if you start with a square, when you roll it out, it'll be easier to roll. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of make this dough about 11 inches long and 8 inches wide. And you kind of want your sides to be straight and square. That's going to play a big role when it comes to rolling your dough to make the loaf. And as I go, I kind of squeeze the edges in a little bit. You want to, as much as possible, keep the dough about the same width throughout the rectangle. So now that I have that set, I'm going to turn to the matcha dough. And we're going to do the exact same thing. And that, to me, looks very similar. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the matcha dough and put it right on top of our white dough. And you kind of want the matcha to be about 1/4 inch smaller than the white dough. So I'm just going to spread it out a little bit to where I want it. And when it comes to the swirl, we want lots of swirls. So in order to accomplish that, what we're going to do is we're going to cut the dough in half. And you can just eyeball it. After you cut the dough in half, you're going to take one side and place it on the other. And you can already see the layers starting to form in our bread. And what you want to do here is you want to try to make the top layer match the bottom layer as much as possible. So that might mean a little tugging of your dough to make sure that it's even. So now that we have our dough stacked, it's time for our final roll. I'm gonna move the dough to the middle of my mat to give me some space. When you roll this out the final and last time, what you need to do is make sure that the width of your dough is the width of the pan. So I'm just gonna put this here as a marker. You can take your roll, and what we're gonna do, gently roll the dough to 8.5 inches wide. And I like to make sure I have my width first. So I take my pan, and that looks pretty good. Now, how wide you want it is up to you. The wider it is, the more swirl you're going to have. I like to take it about, 11 to 12 inches long. Again, you can kind of see the layers happening here. Once you have it as wide as you want it to be, it's time to roll the loaf. I start from the right, and I make a very tight circle until I have what looks like a little loaf. Once you have this set, you want to make sure that the seam is on the bottom. With the seam on the bottom, you're going to gently take the loaf and place it in the pan that has been buttered. You'll take some saran wrap and let this rise for another 30 to an hour. What you want to happen is for the dough to rise enough to get a little bit of love above the lip of the pan. And I've actually already have that done and prepared. This is going to be your risen loaf. Once it's risen and you're happy with how far it's risen, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take some warm honey and gently brush the top of your dough bread. Doesn't have to be perfect. This will just give the loaf a little bit of shine once it's out of the oven. Once your loaf is honeyed, the last step is decorative. You're gonna take black sesame seeds and just sprinkle them on top of the loaf. Once the loaf is prepared, we're going to put it into the oven for about 30 to 35 minutes at 375. Make sure when you're baking your bread to have the rack at the lowest level possible. A little too high and your bread will get a little bit too brown. So make sure to put the rack at the very lowest level when you stick your bread into the oven. After 30 to 35 minutes, you can check your dough, or if you're like me, you're watching it the entire time. And the result is going to be this beautiful matcha swirl bread. I'm so excited to have been able to share this with you today. Thanks so much for joining me here at Ingles Table. Be sure and check out our website for more tips, tricks, and recipes. I'll see you next time.